Percy Jackson, son of Hades, prince of the underworld. Chapter 1, Chapter 1. First person's POF. Being an orphan sucks major ass. My parents died when I was 5 years old, so I really don't remember much of them. The thing about them was that they were both only children and both of them were orphans as well, so when they died, I had no other family members to go to, thus to the orphanage I went. It was not a pretty place. The orphanage barely received any funding, and as soon as I got there, they made me start working and doing chores to be able to eat. If you didn't do the chores, it meant no dinner or lunch for you. There were times when couples would adopt us, looking for an older kid compared to an infant since it was easier to take care of us. But the reason they would adopt us wasn't always pure. Well, for me it wasn't. The reason they would adopt me would be to get financial assistance from the government and to get free labor. They would always think that just because they put a roof over my head and fed me 3 times a day, I would happily do everything they told me to do with a smile on my face. There was no love, no appreciation, no effort on their part, just a free laborer living with them. This went on for years while moving from house to house and family to family until I was 15 years old. When I turned 15, fewer and fewer couples even bothered to look at me, which I guess was fine by me. I didn't want or need their love anyways. So, as the adoptions became less and less, I decided to start looking for a job anywhere I could, even if it meant minimum wage, like cleaning dishes, serving tables, just about anything. I would have gone insane in this system and day-to-day life if it wasn't for different books, novels, anime, manga. Those practically saved my sanity. It was a nice escape from reality. When I turned 18, I was officially kicked out of the orphanage as I had to live on my own now, being technically an adult. Luckily, I had saved up money from my jobs to live in a tiny apartment by myself. Thanks to my many years of work, the place I was working at started slowly promoting me. I went from washing dishes and serving tables to being allowed to work in the kitchen. It looked like my life was turning around. Maybe this was my turning point. I had always lived by one philosophy: live life to the fullest, doing whatever the hell you want and please. After all, you only live once, might as well enjoy it. Money was important in order to do that, so I was very thankful for the raise. As I was walking to my apartment, looking at my notice of a raise with a wide smile on my face, I heard a shout for help, which was followed by a rougher voice quieting it down. "Quiet, woman, no one is gonna hear you and I don't want to hear it. All I want to hear is you moaning in pleasure." Now what did I do? Well, of course I went and intervened. When I appeared between an alleyway, I saw a bald-headed guy with tattoos covering his arms. He was pressing a girl, who was wearing a school uniform, against the wall with a knife pressed against her neck. "Oi, oi, oi, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I said, with my voice coming out colder than I intended. I couldn't help but look at him in disgust, something he surely picked up on. While still pressing the girl, he turns his attention towards me, and put on an annoyed look. "Who the fuck are you? Don't you know any better than you get in the way when a man is trying to have some fun?" I just crouched down and picked up a rock that was close by. "Ain't she a bit young for you?" I then put a hand over my mouth to pretend I'm trying to stop myself from laughing. "Wait, let me guess. Your dick's too small, so you go for younger girls so it looks bigger. FTTTT, how pathetic." An enraged look overcomes his expression as he seems to forget about the girl and comes charging at me with his knife in his hands. I threw the rock I picked up earlier and hit him perfectly in the face, knocking him back slightly and causing him to bleed. "Run!" I yell out to the girl, causing her to sprint out of there, and I do that same. As I start running, I started laughing due to the situation. Ha 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 ha, that was crazy. Which was then followed by the sound of gunshot. What followed after was pain, a hit, searing pain on my back, causing me to fall forward. Ugh. As I fell, I slowly turned back and saw the previous guy with a gun in his hands, which of course he did. Why wouldn't he with my luck? With blood dripping down his nose and an angered expression, he slowly walks up to me without lowering his gun. He then spits to the side as he asked, "Any last words, punk, before I officially kill you for good?" Just 6 words, I said while feeling myself become colder with every passing second due to blood loss. "Congratulations on becoming a big brother." Now the guy looked lost. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He looked at me with so much confusion. He asked, "What?" Hearing him ask, I can't stop myself from smirking. If I'm going to die, I'm not going down without looking cool. After how much I fucked and came in your mom last night, there's just no way she isn't pregnant. The guy looked like he completely lost it. He aimed his gun and just started pressing the trigger, again and again and again and again, until he emptied his clip and darkness consumed me. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. The Three Fate. 3 very powerful women, the weavers of destiny. Their origin unknown. Some have many speculations of them. Some say they were born from the essence of night, also known as Nyx. And some say they are the daughters of the king of God. They were so powerful that supposedly he didn't have any more children with their mother, the Titan Themis, in fear of mother more powerful children that could potentially dethrone him. Clotho, who is in charge of the fate of births, the one that weaves the string of fate for any mortal or immortal. Lachesis, who is in charge of measuring the lifespan and string, and Atropos, who decides when to cut the string, signifying when they die. Clotho was weaving a brand new string of life. A new fate. She then went one trance weaving this particular string. Her hands just kept moving until she finally stopped. When she came out of her trance she looked at the string in front of her in shock, for normally any string woven would be a beautiful color blue, but this one was different from the rest. This one was golden. Clotho called out to her sisters, Lachesis, Atropos, you have to see this. She yelled out excitedly. Two grannies then magically appeared. What is it? I'm busy, Atropos said coldly. But before she could acquire any further they both stopped what they were doing and just stared at the thread in Clotho's hand. It's beautiful, Lachesis said in awe. I don't think I want to cut this, it's simply too beautiful. I'm afraid I'm going to damage it, Atropos said in an unbelievable tone. Her sister looked at her in shock, for her to even say something like that. All three sisters then started looking at each other, they then nodded their heads and started changing forms. Their real forms. Clotho looked like a beautiful young maiden with long white hair reaching all the way down her back, wearing a white dress making her look divine. Pig. Lachesis, who had silver hair reaching down her shoulders, while wearing a silver toga. While looking at everything with a small smile. Pig. And Atropos, a beautiful woman, with long shiny black hair, reaching down her back. She had beautiful dark eyes that looked like the night sky itself, looking at everything coldly, without much expression on her face. Pig. When they appeared in their natural form they both then said in sync, it looks like he is finally born. He shall be our husband from this moment forward. He shall live a long and fruitful life, with great fortune. They all soon teleported in front of a cradle with a beautiful baby boy, sleeping peaceful without a care in the world. Each of the three fates touch a part of the baby's head. One touches the top of his head, another one touches one side of his cheeks, while the other one touches the other side of the cheek. They then started caressing him as they softly whispered, "Happy birthday, dear husband, sleep well," and just as quickly as they came, they went. A few hours earlier, a beautiful woman with black hair and black eyes was seen sitting alone in the middle of the night in a wooden cabin in the middle of the woods. The woman was clearly pregnant and was seen with her legs spread apart about to give birth any minute, all by herself. Huff huff, I know I foresaw this day, but it still doesn't make it any easier. Huff huff. She then started screaming out in pain, "Ugh, goddamn it. Stop making it difficult and just come out already." The woman just continued pushing with great force and vigor, giving birth all by herself without any support but her own. After pushing for a few minutes, close to an hour, she felt the head turtling out of her exit. "Argh, I've done this before, just breathe, you got this, just breathe." And one final push to push it all out. Ugh. When the baby came out of her, the baby was just floating out. With magic that the woman was controlling, the umbilical cord came off the baby like it was a plug, and started floating to the mother's arms. Why isn't it crying? They always cry when they're born. No, he can't be dead. I saw him. My visions couldn't be wrong, the mother thought with a slight panic. With shaky hands she reached out and grabbed her baby from the air. After carefully examining him with magic and all she possibly could, she let out a sigh of relief. He's awake and everything, he's just not crying. Thankfully, she then used her magic to fully clean him and bring her close to her chest. She lowered her dress slightly and exposed her nipples to the baby's mouth, which he greedily took, causing the mom to start laughing at him. "Aren't you a hungry fella?" she teased, with a relieved sigh. She then closed her eyes and checked her internal clock. 12 a.m. on the dot. I guess I wouldn't expect anything else more ominous from his son after all, she thought with a weary smile. Meanwhile the baby, who was sucking greedily, was having thoughts of his own. "I'm free. Yippee. After getting shot multiple times, the last thing he expected was to be placed in a womb. At first he thought he died and was placed in the magical void that all fanfic MC just so happens to magically survive for the billionth time. But it turns out, it was just the womb. After moving around, finding it wet and hearing the voice of his new mother, he figured it out rather quickly, which was good. But he had to spend months and the months in that cold wet darkness for a long time, making him almost go crazy. Luckily his mother's voice brought him comfort and quickly brought him back from borderline insanity. He just continued sucking on his mother's titties, sucking nutrients. While he was drinking his mother's milk, he felt his head being patted as he heard the voice he was all familiar with officially name him. Lucian Blackheart. Yes, that shall be your name. His name was the last thing Lucian heard before falling asleep in his new mother's arms. Chapter 3. Seeing her son fast asleep and resting, she let out a small smile which contained a lot of affection. She carefully put him to the cradle next to her, she kissed him good night and quickly fell asleep due to the exhausting labor she went through. While they slept, the three fates appeared and quickly left as they came. While the two slept peacefully, the sun came rising through like every morning, but this time something strange happened. As the sun crept through the window rising higher and higher, it soon hit the sleeping Lucian. As it did, the rays of the sun faltered slightly before it continued rising. Luckily no one saw it. If someone did, they would have thought their eyes were playing tricks on them. Location: the underworld, Hades' castle. Hades was seen at a dining table with his queen Persephone. Even though they don't need to eat, they still do it to enjoy their time together with each other. While Hades was about to take a bite of his food, he faltered and stopped. He scrunched up his eyebrows as he said, "That's weird." Persephone looked up from her plate and tilted her head. "What's wrong?" "It's Apollo. He's here in the underworld heading towards our direction." Persephone then looked confused. "What is he doing here? The underworld is the very last place I would expect the sun god to visit." "I don't know, but it seems urgent. And he's already at the front door." "Great. What better way to start your morning than an unexpected visit from your nephew?" Hades said sarcastically before dapping up his mouth with a napkin and standing up. "Come on, let's go see what he wants," Hades said while flicking his hand and dissolving all the food on the table. Persephone sighed as well and repeated Hades' actions and followed him to their throne room. When they both arrived, they sat on their respective throne and awaited for Apollo. Hades image. Persephone image. Apollo burst through the door of the throne room with a serious expression, and without waiting for Hades to address him, Apollo spoke. "Uncle. What the hell have you created?" Apollo image. Hades looked down on Apollo irritated. "Watch your tone, boy. You don't have the right to come down here and start making demands." Apollo sighed. "You're right, but still, this need to he address." "Just get on with it," Persephone said, equally irritated due to having her time together with Hades interrupted. "A son has been born and it's your son. As soon as my son rays laid upon him, I received a prophecy." "Just what have you created?" Apollo couldn't help ask again. Both Hades and Persephone's eyes widened in shock. Persephone snapped her head towards Hades. "You had another child. I allowed those two from that woman, but there's another one." Hades placed a hand on his face as he sighed the oath. "Shit," he thought. He then raised a hand towards Persephone to calm her down. "Since he was just born, it means whatever happened 9 months ago. Do you remember what we did around that time?" Persephone, hearing this, became embarrassed as her face grew red. "It's not my fault, okay? I wanted to get out of here and experience what a drunken night out together was like." Hades, hearing this, sighed once again and turned towards her. "Yeah, except that when you actually got drunk, you wanted to also experience what a threesome with another woman was like." Okay, I get it. I'm starting to remember bits and pieces. When we got to the bar and got wasted with the mortals, we approached a woman who looked like she was drinking her sorrows away." Hades nodded his head. "I was drunk as well, but I remember you saying you wanted to make her feel better, so you invited her to the threesome. That thing about her is that she looked really familiar, but I was too drunk to care about it. And we did the deed the next morning. She was just gone." Apollo, hearing this, cleared his throat to get their attention, which worked. Both Hades and Persephone stopped reminiscing about their crazy night out and turned their attention back to Apollo. Seeing him, Hades scowled. "Right, you're here. So what was this prophecy that has got you so worked up? There's no way you would have come all the way here just so say I've another kid out there somewhere." Apollo then said what he prophesied in the realm where shadows dance and fate's threads entwine. A scion born of Hades and betrayal's line. The prince of the underworld and treacherous seed, whose might would make immortal beings bleed. With power to end the undying's reign. He'd sever their existence, breaking immortal chains. Beloved by the fates, in their tender embrace. He'd bring honor eternal to Hades' sacred place. Born to bring glory to the house of the Dark Lord. His deeds resounding, their legacy assured. Through shadows he'd stride, in eternal might. Granting honor and strength, casting immortal plight. In the cosmic tapestry, his destiny thrives. Bringing eternal honor to Hades' lives. Both Persephone and Hades sat there in their thrones slack-jawed, before Hades started chuckling before turning into mad laughter. He ha 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 ha. Hades laughed, his palm on his face as he threw his head back as his laughter turned crazier. A son of mine, bringing me glory and honor, and with the power to one day kill immortals permanently. Ah ha 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 ha. Further is not going to like this, Persephone said with a hint of worry in her voice, feeling somewhat responsible for whatever fate becomes of the child. Hades then stopped laughing and started exerting a large amount of pressure and power on Apollo. He will hear none of this. If I find out, I will plunge this world into an eternal darkness, and it will start with your destruction. Yes, Uncle Apollo said while gritting his teeth, in fear. Maybe coming here wasn't a good idea, he thought to himself. But as he turned around to leave, Hades called out to him. Swear it, Apollo, Hades demanded coldly. What, he asked, turning back around. Swear it on the Styx River that you will keep this information to yourself. I swear on the Styx River that I will not spread out this information to anyone. Thunder echoed through the underworld as Hades nodded his head. I'm still curious, uncle. Just what would you be planning with him? Apollo asked, unable to contain his curiosity. First, I would have to find the mother. And I already have a feeling. I know who it is based on the prophecy you brought. That's all you need to know, Hades said indifferently. Apollo just shook his head and started exiting the castle, leaving Hades and Persephone alone to discuss what to do next. When Apollo left, Persephone turned to Hades and asked, you said you knew who the mother was. Who is it? Thanks to the prophecy I know why that woman looked so familiar. I was too drunk to remember at the time, but thanks to the line, a scion born of Hades and betrayal's line, I finally remembered. She has been escaping death for thousands of years. I've been looking for her everywhere. It's almost like she had help escaping my and Thanatos. That alongside the betrayal's line, there could only be one answer. Persephone grew impatient. Well, spit it out already. Stop leaving me hanging. Who did we sleep with last night? Hades smirks. She's a powerful witch from ancient times, one of the Argonauts, a princess of Colchis, was a priestess of Hecate. She is Medea, the witch of betrayal. Medea's image. Chapter 4. I stir awake as a ray of sunshine hits me in the face. Don't they have curtains in this world, Jesus? I thought as I opened my eyes. I then started to notice something strange. I can actually see pretty well. Babies who are just born shouldn't be able to do that. Either it's a special case for me since I'm a reincarnator, or this is normal for people of this world. What is this world anyways? Is this like a world I know, or is it a brand new world? Sigh. So much to think about and so much to discover. I guess that's part of my life. I'm getting quite excited. But before my thoughts to dwell further, a beautiful woman came into view. And when I mean beautiful, I mean simply divine. She is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. Flowing dark hair, beautiful black eyes, while wearing a beautiful long black dress, with red painted nails and jewelry enhancing her beauty. She reached out and picked me up from where I was laying, and looked at me with a smile full of motherly love. Yup, that's it. This is the moment. I have officially became a mama's boy. There's no denying it. She then started humming a strange tone while softly swaying me in her arms. She then plucked out her boobs and started to breastfeed me, which is such a weird experience. And just like that, a month quickly passes with my new mother following a routine. She would pick me up and breastfeed me and walk around the sound humming. She would sometimes bring the cradle next to her as she would start reading stories about different heroes and their tragic lives. But thanks to that, I was able to confirm that this is Earth indeed, or something similar, due to the familiar stories that mother would tell. She would talk about gods such as Zeus and the likes. Although she wouldn't say their name for some reason, it was heavily implied that that's who she was talking about, as she mostly used their titles as reference. Did I mention she could magic? Cause apparently she could do freaking magic. When she would need something, she would just motion it with her hand and it would start levitating towards her hand. When it was finally a month since I was born, my mother, who I still didn't know the name of, finally took me out of a wooden cavern. Once outside, I noticed that the entire area is surrounded by woods and trees. We were completely isolated. Weird, I thought while looking at the surroundings. Oh, why aren't you always just a curious little thing? My mother said, looking at me, turning my head everywhere to get a better view. She then walked around the perimeter of the house with me in her arms. There was a large empty field, and in that empty field our little cabin stood right in the direct center of it. It was pretty big. Mother then pointed at a tree and started following along with her finger, going in a circle. Although you can't understand me, I feel like I owe it to your curiosity to explain. The trees in front act as a ward to keep monsters from ever detecting your scent, my little demigod. What, I shouted in my own thoughts, a fucking demigod? I'm a demigod? Talk about an upgrade. Now I'm curious who my father is. Are the gods like the ones told from different mythologies? I mean, they have to be, right? After all the stories my mother has told, some of them I know from my past life, and she did sound like she was speaking of events that actually happened and not just some heroic story. After that shocking revelation, time went by smoothly. The months went by. By the time I was 5 months old, I was already crawling and grabbing onto things to stand up on my own. By the time I was 6 months along, I was walking smoothly by myself. By the time 7 months, I said my first words. Mum, I called out to my mother while stretching out my arms to hold me, which I strangely came to really enjoy. Oh, it seems I forgot to mention, my mother just so happened to be Medea, the witch of betrayal. I was so scared when I heard that I almost pooped myself. Now the reason I was so scared: she didn't hesitate to kill her 2 children by stabbing them in the heart just to be petty. I mean, slay queen, but I don't want it to happen to me. I just got here. By the time I was 8 months along, I started trying to learn how to read and learn different languages, since most of the books my mother owned were mostly in Greek and in other languages that weren't English due to how old they were. Keyword trying. It was easy to learn Greek, so not so much the other languages. It would seem I have dyslexia in this life. Even reading English has become a task. It was actually thanks to that I was able to learn that my father probably belongs to Greek mythology, which is not good. My mother wouldn't tell me who my father is even when I tried my ultimate weapon called puppy dog eyes. In all honesty, I really hope it's not Zeus. I really don't want a rapist father and a vengeful stepmother. Now who I want it to be, most likely, it is to go to my favorite god Hades, the most unbothered and underappreciated of the gods. While I was sitting down on my mother's bed with a book lying flat in front of me, my mother lay on her side while resting her head on her palm. She was playing with my hair while smiling at me, watching how much I was struggling to read. I could feel my face scrunch up trying to read. After a while I started to unconsciously pout as I muttered, "This is difficult," in a tiny cute baby voice. My mother, hearing me, broke down into giggles while ruffling my hair. Or, is my little genius having a bit of trouble reading? It's not funny, I pouted some more, which just caused her to laugh even louder. Watching me look at her with a pout made her stop laughing for a bit, but her smile that was filled with amusement never left her face. She then held my face and gave it a kiss. "Wait here a second, I made something just for you." She then got up and looked around the house while muttering, "Now where was that I put them?" After a few seconds she then exclaimed, "Aha, here they are." She came back into the bed while carrying a small rectangular black box that looks like the one you would get when getting glasses. She laid back in bed and opened the box, and it was just that, a pair of black frame glasses. I looked at her with confusion. "Glasses? I'm dyslexic, not blind," I said. "No, silly. It took a while, but I was able to make them just for you with a little bit of magic. These glasses will help you with your dyslexia. Here, put them on." As she put them on my face, she started laughing again. I would be laughing too if I saw a baby with large glasses covering his face. I just sighed and turned back towards the book. The letters, which were once floating around my head, slowly moved back to where they belonged. They shook for a brief moment before stopping and staying in place. "So how is it?" she asked with a smile. "Whoa, these are awesome." "Thank you, Mum," I said. She just continued smiling while giving me a loving look which never fails to make me blush. She went and kissed my cheek once again as she says, "I'm glad." I then went back to trying to read about different languages. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Third person's POF. After everything that happened, Lucien is now officially 1 year old. It's been exactly 1 year since he was born on June 20th. His mother, Medea, was seen baking a birthday cake with Lucien sitting on top of the kitchen counter helping. "Remember, my little foes, in order for you to become a good husband you must learn how to cook. Only a man that knows how to care of a woman can really call themselves a man," Medea lectured as she playfully pointed a whisk at him. 1-2. "Yes, Mama," Lucien said in a cute voice while doing a military salute. She then nodded and grabbed an egg, handing it to him. "Here, just like how I taught you." Lucien nodded and tapped an egg the edge of where he was sitting. He then held it over the bowl she was stirring and pulled the shell apart, letting the egg drop inside it as Medea started whisking away. The two spent the day together, making small sweets, and when they were done Mead put a candle on a small cake as she said, "Come on, blow on the candle. I heard this is the part where you make a wish." Lucien nodded his head and thought about it and blew out the candle. Medea clapped and kissed Lucien on the cheeks. "Congratulations, my little foes," she said with a smile. They then started to eat the cake they made together. When they were finished, Medea went and got him a wrapped present, Here I spent months writing this, since I knew how one day you would be interested in learning magic. Lucian then opened and in his hands laid a book with the words Introductory to Magic, for Beginners. Lucian, seeing this, grew excited. Really? You're going to start teaching magic now? Is it finally time? This is something Lucian has been desperately trying to learn for months since he knew he was in a magical world. Coming from a world devoid of magical energies, he was quickly able to identify something that felt different about him. About his body, he was able to detect a distinct type of magical energy within himself. When he discovered it, he was about to make contact with it and make it do his bidding, but something stopped him. Something within himself told him that if he makes contact with it early on, it would cause him great pain and leave him crippled. Seeing the book that his mother was gifting him, Lucian closed his eyes and tried to make contact with his magical energy. This time he didn't feel the warning, so that gave him to go ahead. Yes! Lucian shouted in a high-pitched voice while throwing both fists in the air, startling his mother. What did you do? Medea wondered why he was so excited. I'm finally able to use the weird energy thing inside me without telling me it's going to hurt me. Lucian, clearly happy. Medea scrounged her eyes and looked at him in confusion and very seriously asked, what are you talking out, Lucy, and be honest with me, I'll know if you're lying. Oh, she has gotten into the habit of giving me a girly nickname when she is extremely serious about something, Lucian thought nervously. Well, I've always been able to know something is inside of me, if that makes sense, like a type of energy. I thought it was what you would always use to move things around. So when I went and tried to do what you do, something told me it wasn't a good idea. When I say something, I don't mean like a voice, I mean like I knew something bad would happen to me if I did that. If that makes sense? Lucian finishes, tilting his head, unsure if he wasn't just rambling nonsense. I see. Medea said, deep in thought. After thinking about it for a few seconds, she patted Lucian's head. Wait here for a few minutes, I have to get everything prepared. Lucian nodded his head and started reading his birthday present. So there's 9 chapters in total, each for a specific field of magic and their introduction into it. Chapter 1, Introduction to Ancient Spells. Basic explanations of ancient spells and incantations, accompanied by their historical significance and potential uses. These could range from simple charms to protective wards. Chapter 2, Understanding Elemental Manipulation, a section detailing the basics of elemental control, such as harnessing the power of fire, water, earth, and air. This includes exercises or instructions for practicing elemental manipulation. Chapter 3, Alchemy and Potion Making, instructions on the creation of potions, elixirs, and herbal remedies, emphasizing their various effects and applications. This section provides easy-to-make recipes and methods for brewing magical concoctions. Chapter 4, Rituals and Ceremonies, insights into conducting mystical rituals or ceremonies, their purposes, and the precautions to be taken. It could cover rituals for divination, invocation, or channeling magical energies. Chapter 5, Mystical Artifacts and Relics, explanations about powerful mystical artifacts, their histories, and potential uses. It might include information about relics known for their unique abilities or connections to ancient gods. Chapter 6, Understanding Mythological Beings, an overview of various mythical creatures, their traits, and how to interact with or defend against them. This section offers advice on dealing with creatures from Greek mythology. Chapter 7, Ethical Use of Magic, guidance on the responsible and ethical use of magic, emphasizing the importance of balance and caution while wielding mystical powers. Chapter 8, Navigating the Modern World, practical tips for using magic in the modern world, discreetly and responsibly, to avoid attracting unwanted attention or causing harm inadvertently. Chapter 9, Ancient Texts and Hidden Knowledge, references to ancient texts or hidden sources of mystical knowledge, giving guidance on where to find deeper insights into magic. The book was pretty large with multiple pages. While looking at all the chapters and their descriptions, Lucian thought about what he wanted to do. Since there's a section of teaching me on how to make magical artifacts and things of the sort, why don't I later on turn this book into a magical grimoire, tracking down all types of magic I learned? Okay, I'm done, Medea said. When Lucian looked up from his new book, he saw his mother with lighted candles on top of the table with a scroll in the middle and what looks like a pentagram underneath it. She went towards Lucian with a feather in hand. When she got close, she said, "I'm sorry, it's only going to sting a little." She grabbed Lucian's hand and pricked his finger with the pointy part of the feather and went back towards the scroll that was laid on the table. "Ouchie," Lucian said as he put his pricked finger in his mouth to make it feel better. Medea hovered over the scroll with the blood-tainted feather and looked ahead with cloudy eyes as she mumbled something in Greek. Delta epsilon xi epsilon mu omicron upsilon tau eta nu kappa lambda eta rho omicron delta tau eta sigma omicron upsilon. 3. Her hands then started moving, writing down on the scroll in a fast and quick manner. When she was done she just shook her head as to get her thoughts straight and looked down on the scroll. I see. That makes sense, Medea muttered while reading what she wrote down. Legacy, sun affinity and magical insight, a strong connection to the sun with occasional insights or intuitions, along with access to magical foresight. An. 1. Originally I was going to turn that whisk into a knife and have the MC flinch at her, making Medea lower the knife slowly and continue baking sadly, until the MC softly apologizes for flinching and then they would have had a touching moment. But it was too much drama so I said no. 2. Phos is the Greek word for light. She's calling him her little light. 3. Translates to, show me your legacy. Chapter 6. Chapter 6. Third person's POF. Lucian looked at his mother in confusion. What are you doing? Medea just turned to him and went and showed him the scroll, and as he looked at it he thought about what it says, legacy? Like in the Percy Jackson universe, that legacy? My mother is Medea, who is a Greek hero. My father is most probably a Greek god. Most stories my mother has told are from Greek, and now I have a supposed legacy. My scent apparently attracts monsters that my mother had to set up a ward. I'm either in a universe very similar to the Percy Jackson books, or I'm in the Percy Jackson's books themselves. What's a legacy? Lucian asked, wanting to make sure if what he knows is right or wrong in this universe. Medea smiled as she answered, a legacy is a mortal who is a second or further generation descendant of a deity, namely the children, grandchild, or descendant of a demigod. They may or may not possess similar abilities to their godly ancestors. As I'm the granddaughter of Helios, I possess a legacy from his abilities, something that you have as well. It's the same, all right, Lucian thought as he nodded at his mother's explaining. Lucian then put on a pondering expression. He was debating whether it was the right time to ask this or not. It seems you want to ask me something, sweetie. What is it? You don't have to be scared to ask me anything. Lucian nodded once again as he thought, to hell with it. Lucian's expression then got serious. Well, as serious as a 1-year-old baby's face can get, and asked, I want to know who my father. Medea's expression then turned awkward, which then shifted to nervousness. I guess this is as good of a time as any to tell you. Well, you see, your father. Your father is the god of the underworld, Hades. Lucian's eyes along with his mouth opened wide with shock. That's weird. Dreadful. Disgusting. Worrisome. That's amazing. Medea looked at her son with a hint of surprise evident on her face. You're not disgusted or bothered by the fact that your father is the king of the dead? Bothered? Are you kidding? Out of all the gods you've told me stories about, he was mostly my favorite. So hearing he's now my father is so cool. Medea just looks at Lucian a bit weirdly. To each their own, I guess. That's definitely not the expression I was expecting, if I'm being honest. Lucian then started yawning. Damn it, stupid baby body still needing sleep. Medea just smiled at him softly before picking him up. Come on now, it's time for you to go to sleep, you must be tired. She said as she put Lucian's head to rest on her shoulder and started swaying him to sleep. Lucian, yawning once again, just says, Tut, who's tired? I'm not tired, I'm the definition of woke zzzzzzz. Medea started giggling to herself while listening to him. After laying Lucian to sleep, Medea sat down at the head of the table. After sighing she said, I know you're out there, please stop hiding. Who says I was hiding? I was just silently observing, Hades said, appearing out of nowhere while taking off a warrior's helmet, while also already sitting down at the opposite seat of where Medea was sitting. How did you know I was here? Hades asked curiously. He knew she wasn't actually able to detect him, so her calling him out was mostly a guess. I knew you would appear if I said your name. Medea explained. Hades raised a brow at that. You willingly let your location be known after hiding and running after all this time? Why? Medea, sighing, just explained her reasoning. My time is slowly coming to an end. I already served my purpose. The magic and help I used and received could only help so much. You know this is a dangerous gamble, right? What's stopping me from claiming your soul right here and now? You being so knowledgeable should know I hate it when people escape death, Hades said with a cold expression on his face. Cause then you would have angered Lucian, and that would have soured any kind of relationship you would have had with him, and even I know that's something you wouldn't have liked. Hades clicked his tongue, His expression then turned into a smirk. Well, I wouldn't want his favorite god to disappoint him, now would I? The most amount of leeway I can give is 6 more years, after that it's out of my control and I would have to get violent in order to claim your soul, no matter how much my relation with him is affect. Medea nodded her head. That's perfect, I only have 6 years left anyways. The atmosphere between the two of them then got a little awkward as none of them knew what to say next. Hades turned his head and just continued looking at his son. Medea, seeing this, smirked. It's his birthday, you know, after you are going to at least give him something? Hades just scoffs at that. He's 1 year old. None of what I would give him would be useful to him. I'll give him something when he turns 5, maybe then he'll make use of it. Medea scoffed. Yeah, so? It's the thought that counts. Even with a title like the rich one, you sure a cheapskate. Hades narrowed his eyes. Watch it, woman. I'll give him something on his 5th that'll make up for the rest I miss. Happy? Medea just shrugged her shoulders. It's not me who decides if I would be happy with that. I'm pretty sure Persephone would give him something as well, Hades said, looking at Lucian with a smile. Huh? She isn't mad about this? Medea asked in surprise. Hades shook his no, quite the opposite actually. She feels responsible for him. Medea was once again surprised by this revelation. And why is that? Do I need to reiterate what happened that night into details? Medea blushed thinking about the night. Is it because she initiated it? Medea guessed. While Hades nodded his head, he then turned towards Lucian one last time and turned to Medea. Remember 6 years, he reminded her as he picked up his helm of darkness and disappeared from all of her senses. Medea shook her head and let out a sigh of relief. He's just as scary as they described. Luckily he was holding back his aura of fear, or I think I would have gone insane. Medea then yawned and realized that she was also tired, that meeting the king of the underworld was more exhausting than she was expecting. She laid down on her bed and went to rest, and just like that 2 years has passed, making Lucian officially 3 years old. Chapter 7. Chapter 7. Third person's POF. Lucian, who was now 3 years old, stood at the backyard of the house facing targets made out of wood in the shape of human figures, looking almost like a scarecrow. Lucian waved his hand as his shadow moved at his command, taking the shape of a large tentacle. The tentacle acted like a whip as it smashed itself onto the scarecrow in front of him, breaking it into pieces. Lucian then controlled the whip shadow tentacle to pierce through the scarecrow on the left, leaving a rather large hole right in the middle of it. Lucian then proceeded to split the tentacle into small tendrils and made it wrap around the last remaining scarecrow on the right. Lucian made a fist-closing motion towards it, which caused the tendrils to start shaking, trying to squish it into pieces but was having difficulty. Lucian started to shake as well as he let out a yell while tightening his fist even tighter. Ah! The wood that was holding the scarecrow in place started to crack due to the pressure, sending splinters flying off it slightly. Lucian then let out one big final yell. Ah! Which caused the wood to break and compact onto each with a loud snap, sending pieces of wood flying about. Lucian was brought down to one knee, breathing heavily with sweat rolling down his forehead. He let out a sigh and decided to sit down on the floor to catch his breath. Phew, that was tough. I guess now I can get my black belt in karate, he joked. After resting for a few minutes, he stood up and went towards a barrel that was next to the house filled with multiple wooden weapons, even though they were slightly big for him. Lucian picked his favorite weapon to practice with. The scythe. He put the scythe over his shoulder and rested his arm on the handle. He smirked as soon as he got it on his shoulder and started walking arrogantly with it. As he walked, he put a sway in his steps, making a big show out of it. He then grabbed the handle of the scythe and swung it, stopping it right in front of him. He proceeded to then ask nobody around any last words. He waited for a few seconds and raised an eyebrow. No? He asked once again to nobody. Which was followed by him continuing his swing of the scythe. Then considered your soul reaped. He then dropped the scythe and got on his hands and knees as his face grew red with shame. I can't believe I just did that. What the hell's wrong with me? I'm so embarrassed. Just kill me now. What he didn't notice was his mother on the second floor of the house recording everything of which he just did with a teasing expression on her face. Lucian stood up, grabbing his scythe, shook his head. He made the scythe stand up straight while making it lean on him to free up his hands, which he used to smack himself in the face. It's time to get serious now, Lucian said to himself, gaining a serious expression. He took a hold of the scythe with both hands and started swinging it multiple times. He would start spinning it and swing it all in on action. He started swinging in large arcs with one hand and switched it by swinging past his back onto the other hand, continuing the sequence of his moves. Sweat kept rolling down his face and chin, but he didn't stop. He started imagining how he would take down his enemies with the scythe. He positioned the scythe downward, holding the handle with two hands with the pointy part of the blade pointed upwards. He swung his scythe, imagining skewering monsters and the likes with blood flowing everywhere. Just thinking about it was getting him excited. He could barely keep still. I was perfectly okay in my last life. Now all of a sudden I have two disabilities put onto me, he thought as his body didn't stop moving, until his muscle ached with pain. After suffering after a while, Lucien heard his mother calling him. "Lucien, that's enough already. The sun is about to set." "Coming," he replied, picking up everything and putting it all away. As he entered the house, his mother handed him a green potion which Lucien looked at with disgust. She chuckled at his expression. "I know you don't like it, sweetie. But it's good for you, especially after exercising. It heals all those aches and gives your body all the nutrients it needs." Lucien grumbles and takes the concoction and downs it with his eyes shut close. After he was done, he stuck out his tongue in disgust. "Blurg. It tastes like horse manure and dirt and grass blended together to make this. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate it. Thanks Mum, I just hate the flavor. Aren't you like one of the greatest twitches to ever live? I'm 1,000,000% sure you know a secret magic spell that you're keeping hidden and looked away as an heirloom which enriches flavor," Lucien said while looking at his mom with narrowed eyes. "Although I appreciate the compliment, I'm still not changing the flavor. Good things sometimes come out of things that are unpleasant. Like although the drink tastes bad, it takes your pain away and keeps you healthy. We are gatekeeping spells now, are we?" Lucien thought as his eyes started to twitch hearing that. "This is child abuse. You would rather watch and laugh at your son, your favorite son by the way, if I must add, suffer injustice on his taste buds just to teach him a lesson on life. If that's not child abuse, I don't know what is." Medea lifted an unimpressed brow. "Lucien, you're seriously talking to me about child abuse?" Medea incredulously asked. "How about this? If you don't go and take a bath, get dressed, and come down to your magic lessons in the next 5 seconds, I'll show you what real child abuse looks like." 5, 4, 3 inches. Medea didn't even have to count much as Lucien was already running away doing what he needed to do. Medea is the very, 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 very last person Lucien wanted to know the interpretation of child abuse from. Medea, watching Lucien run away, scoffed. "Cheeky brat," she muttered with a soft smile. After a few minutes, Lucien came out as fresh as a daisy. He sat down at the table where his mother prepared him something to eat. When he was 1, they started their magic lessons. "All right, repeat what we previously discussed about magic," Medea said in a serious tone. "One thing Lucien learned the hard way: when it comes to magic, Mama, don't play. Magic is the power to rewrite reality as we please. But it comes at a cost, and that cost is energy. For most people, that energy is magically energy. In order to rewrite reality, or in other terms use magic, you need 4 things: a great imagination, intent, enough energy to pull it off, and a strong willpower believing anything is possible. And since magic requires energy and it takes it from anywhere it can get it, including the user's own magical energy. If a user overexerts their magical capabilities too much, it physically takes a toll on their body, causing them fatigue, exhaustion, dizziness, or fainting. It could also cause their magical energy to be drained or depleted, leaving them unable to use their magic until it recharges, leaving them defenseless. If the user isn't powerful enough and doesn't know how to cast them effectively, they will be unable to cast incredibly powerful spells. Medea nodded her head. "Good. Now we will continue where we left off yesterday. You said you have made a discovery. What is it?" Lucien smirked as he looked at her and brought what he wrote. "It's easier to grow your magic reverse as a kid compared to an adult. When one turns into an adult, one may never be able to grow their reserve unless with extreme measures." The pages then went on to explain his hypothesis on the matter, leaving Medea shocked. Chapter 8. Chapter 8. Third person's POF. Medea looked at the papers in her hands in shock. She shook her head to get her thoughts straight. "Wait, let me rephrase what you just wrote to see if I get what you're saying. So basically you believe your magical reserve energy is like a metaphysical muscle. The more you strain it, the stronger and larger your magic and reserve will get once it recovers. It's easier on a child because they are still growing, so if you strain your reserve while growing, it will grow alongside you. And it's difficult for adults to do this since they stop growing, so their reserves wouldn't really grow, and it's stuck like that. Unless a god intervenes or something drastic like that. Those are the main points, right?" Medea asked, shocked, since what she was reading actually made sense to her. Lucien's expression then turned smug. I know, I'm a genius. That's why, as I'm sure you can detect, I'm releasing a small amount of my magic energy constantly. It also helps in my control over it, so it's honestly a win-win scenario for me," Lucien said while shrugging his shoulders. Medea, hearing him, shook her head and released in exasperation, "Just be careful, and if you feel like something is wrong, come to me immediately. Now your next lesson, potion making, which would be followed by enchanting." And that's how Lucien spent most of his days. In the morning he would practice his demigod abilities, the ability to control shadows, the ground, and valuable metal. His control over the dead was still something he wasn't allowed to touch. Prohibited by his mother, he wasn't planning on it either. By the afternoon, he would be practicing with different weapons, whether they were a scythe, a spear, a sword, a bow staff, or a bow itself. Mostly anything he could have gotten his hands on, slowly but surely getting better with each practice. Then by the time it was getting dark, it would be time for him to be studying magic, whether it was reading ancient text about it, experimenting with different potions, enchanting different items, or controlling different elements. Controlling the different elements was something hard for Lucien to do. He had an easier time controlling elements that were somehow linked towards his demigod heritage, but had a really difficult time controlling the ones where it was the total opposite. From the four main affinities, fire and earth were the easiest for him, with air and water being the most difficult. And when he was done with his studies, it was off to bed. This has become a routine for Lucien, with each day becoming better at his craft. He continued this until it was June 20th once again, and he turned 5 years old. After having their little celebration, Medea first started by saying, "There's something you need to know." Lucien looked at her in confusion and a bit of apprehension. "Yes? Well, your father sent you a little something as a birthday gift," Medea said with a weary smile. Lucien's eyes widened in shock. "Really?" Medea nodded her head. "Yes," he said, "since the gift was special, it will count for all the birthdays be missed and will miss." Medea then stood up and went to the room for a few seconds and came out with a long scythe in her hands. The scythe was as black as the night, with a slightly purple glow. It had a figure of a skull by the section where the blade and pole meet. "Pig. Woo," Lucien said, looking at it. As soon as Medea handed him, she said, "Believe or not, it's actually a gift from both Hades and Persephone. Hades gather all the talented blacksmiths in the underworld that are dead in order to make it, while Persephone gather all the powerful witches and enchanters to, well, enchant it." Lucien looked up at her in surprise. "What? Why would she do that? I understand my dad, since well he's my dad, but shouldn't she, I don't know, hate me or something?" Medea's face then grew slightly red and patted his head. "That's not something you should worry about. Just know she doesn't hate you or dislike you in any sort of way." Lucien nodded his head and looked at the large scythe in his hands. "So, you said it was enchanted. What does it have?" "First you're supposed to drop a drop of your blood on it, since it's a blood-bonded weapon," Medea explained. Lucien nodded. He bit his thumb, causing blood to drip out, which he put on the handle of the large scythe. As his blood made contact with the scythe, it glowed a slightly more purple color before shrinking, fitting perfectly on his hands. "So cool," he muttered while examining the weapon. While examining it, he noticed 6 buttons on it, which was weird. 5 were by the bottom of the pole of the scythe, while the other one was close to the section where the pole and blade intercept. Each button had a specific design to it. Each design glowed a slightly purple color except one. The designs were a stick, a bow, a sword, a spear, and scythe, with the scythe design grayed out, which were the 4 on the bottom. As for the button on the top, it was a design of a link chain. Lucien grew even more excited seeing them. "Is this what I think it cause? If it is this, I'm a freak out." Lucien pressed the button with the image of a stick. As he pressed it, the side of the pole opened up and the blade retracted inside and closed up, leaving Lucien with a bow staff in his hands. Lucien didn't sit still when it happened. He immediately went running outside as Medea rolled her eyes. "Boys and their weapons." As soon as Lucien ran outside, he started laughing while spinning the bow staff in his hands. He started swinging his bow staff, imagining hitting someone with it and the amount of blunt force damage he would do. He then pressed the scythe button once again, causing the blade to come out. He started swinging it, imagining cutting a monster's head off. Lucien proceeded to then press the spear button, causing the long blade to retract in itself again, as a spearhead appeared at the tip of the pole. Lucien started thrusting the spear. He thrust, stab, slash, and hit someone with the pole side of the spear before following it up slash from the spearhead. Lucien then pressed the sword button. The spearhead grew and elongated with the pole, grew shorted and turned into a sword handle. With a black blade in his hands, Lucien started moving around like he was surrounded by an army. He swung his sword and maneuvered his feet and legs into the rhythm, using footwork to swing his sword and attack his imaginary enemies that kept trying to attack him. Lucien nodded his head satisfied with the sword and pressed the bow option. The sword turned back into a pole and the entire back of it, opposite from the scythe's blade, opened up and out came a purple string. The two ends of the pole then started to come together almost as if they were magnet attracted to each other, but only slightly, forming the perfect bow. Lucien pulled back on the string while placing his other hand on the middle of the bow. Lucien imagined having an arrow between his fingers as he pulled the string and released it. The string snapped back into place perfectly. Lucien started plucking at the bowstring as if playing an instrument and nodded his head. Perfect, he said, once again satisfied. Now for the grand finale, he said as he pressed the link chain button, and as he was about to press it he noticed something. Wait, that's weird. I'm pretty sure I accidentally pressed some of the buttons while practicing. Why didn't it switch? That's because it's a blood-bonded weapon, Medea said while leaning on the doorway watching Lucien try out his gift. What's that got to do with anything? Since it's connected to you through your blood, it responds to your feelings and intent. So when you were practicing and your hand would shift towards one of the buttons, it didn't switch since you had no intention of switching. Ah. I see now, that makes sense, Lucien nodded. Lucien then pressed the link chain symbol on it and waited. The weapon shifted back onto a scythe, and as it did the top part of the scythe alongside the blade fell to the ground, while the rest of the pole started turning into a long chain. Lucien wrapped his hand with the end of the chain. Lucien, seeing this, smirked. The gift that just keeps on giving. He took a hold of the chain that was connected closer to the blade and started spinning it around, causing the scythe blade to turn into a saw. A long cut started appearing on the ground where the saw was spinning due to how fast it was spinning. Lucien then flicked his wrist, sending the saw blade flying. Once it reached all it could, Lucien yanked it back with his hand that was wrapped with his chain. Lucien then used his free hand and took a hold of the extended chain and started to guide it around him, causing dirt to go flying everywhere. The ground appeared wounded with how big the cuts look and how long and large the cuts are. You better clean that, Medea said looking at the mess Lucien made. Lucien looked at his mother apologetically. Sorry. Medea just smiled while shaking her head. And went back inside. Just come inside once you're done. It's my turn to give you a gift next. Lucien grew excited at that. His mother never disappointed when it came to birthdays, but first he needed to clean up everything. Lucien then looked at the chain scythe and thought, it responds to my feelings, right? Lucien then proceeded to close his eyes and willed his new weapon to change back into a scythe. When he reopened his eyes, he saw the scythe was back on his hands and smirked. He then noticed another button he missed due to his excitement. This button was at the back of the other buttons and it had the image of a circle. Curious, Lucien pressed it and the scythe quickly turned into a skull ring. Sick. Lucien thought and put it on. He then willed it to turn into a scythe and back into the ring and back into a scythe and back into a ring, and put the ring on his middle finger, with a satisfied smirk. He then turned towards the mess he made and sighed. Maybe if I do the Barney clean-up song there'll be a short time skip, Lucien said to himself as he got to cleaning. Chapter 9. Third person's POF. Thankfully Lucien was able to clean everything up rather quickly thanks to his demigod abilities. When he went inside he found his mother sitting by the table and motioned him to sit. As he did, Medea explained what she wanted to give him. I actually have two gifts to give you. One is something that you personally asked for before but I told you no since you were too little at the time, and the other is something personal to me that only belongs to me. First, I am going to give you the personal gift, and that is a skill of mine, a skill I personally developed throughout my long life. Now that you mentioned it, you're pretty old, aren't you? As soon as those words came out of Lucien, he covered his mouth with both hands and looked at Medea terrified. Medea looked at Lucien with a deadpan expression but one could see her eye twitching. I'm going to just ignore what you just said. Medea sighed. Medea then stood up and went around towards Lucien. I will now teach you the skill known as high-speed divine words, which would allow you to cast spells and magic without incantations. Medea began, her voice composed and authoritative. To cast spells without incantations, you must first understand the essence of magic lies beyond mere words. Focus on the intent behind the spell, she continued, feel the flow of magical energy within and around you. Watch closely. Medea extended her hand, fingers tracing intricate patterns through the air. It's about precise control, melding your will with the arcane forces. Repeat after me, but without uttering a sound, she instructed, demonstrating the gestures slowly. Mimic the movements exactly as I show you. Lucian attempted to replicate Medea's movements. Medea corrected and guided, emphasizing the importance of accuracy and fluidity in the gestures. Concentrate on channeling your intent into the motion, she encouraged. It's a blend of knowledge and instinct. Again, Medea prompted, observing Lucian's progress with a discerning eye. Practice until the gestures become second nature, a seamless extension of your will. Remember, mastery of high-speed divine words requires unwavering focus and dedication, she concluded, imparting the wisdom of her millennia-long expertise onto her son. Lucian kept trying for a few minutes until he ran out of magic. Medea ruffled and patted Lucian's long hair when she saw his downcasted expression when he didn't get it right. You do know it's going to take a while until you get it right, Medea chuckled. I would have been surprised if you actually got it on the first try. Lucian sighed and nodded his head, to which Medea just continued messing with his hair. Don't be so down, remember I still have your other gift. Come on, I'll show you. Lucian smiled and nodded his head. He started following his mother up to the point where she stood before a door. Wait, since when was there a door there? I'm pretty sure there wasn't a door there before. It must be the nasty juices and potions you keep giving me. It's messing with my head, Lucian said before seeing his opportunity and looking at his mother expectantly for the flavor spell. Medea just scoffed before playfully slapping him on the back of the head. The reason you couldn't see it before was because I hidden it under a spell so you wouldn't notice. Medea then opened the door, which showed stairs going downwards into what appeared to be the basement. Yeah, a basement, I always wanted one, Lucian said in a monotone voice. Medea slapped him on the back of head again. Don't be ungrateful, and no, I didn't get you a basement, just follow along. I was just joking, you know. Even if you did get me a basement I would have loved it. Medea just scoffed at that and started going downstairs, which Lucian started following. When they reached the bottom, Lucian's eyes widened. You made me a blacksmith workshop under our house. How the hell didn't I notice? Medea just shrugged her shoulders. It's your fault for not noticing. You mostly spend your time outside training, and when you come inside you mostly spend it reading or training your magic. You do know I'm sometimes gone for hours on end and don't appear until the next day, right? You do? Medea sighed as she put a hand on her face. She shook her head and just started explaining. Well, I didn't do it alone. I had to ask your father for help, much to my dismay. He got some blacksmith spirit of the dead to arrange everything and name every tool you'll ever need, which I went and got. Even Persephone went out of her way to ask those blacksmiths to write down any useful tips and lessons. Look, the book is there by the table. Lucian looked to where Medea was pointing to and saw a table full of tools of all shapes and sizes. Lucian nodded his head and turned around and started walking upstairs. Medea looked at this with a raised brow. What? You don't like it? No, I really like it actually, Lucian's voice croaked with his back turned. Medea widened her eyes in shock. She doesn't even remember hearing Lucian cry before or get so emotional, so hearing his voice like that came as a big surprise. I love it. In fact, Lucian continued before continuing up the stairs. Where are you going? Medea asked softly. I'm going to bake them something as an offering to express my thanks, Lucian voice once again croaked while he continued walking. Due to being an orphan in his last life, he stopped celebrating his birthday since there was no point. He doesn't remember ever getting a birthday present in his past life. So after unexpectedly receiving so much love and kindness, moved Lucian to the point he doesn't even know how to express his thanks, except make them a small offering. And as Lucian disappeared up the stairs, Medea just stood there with a soft smile. What a kid boy, she thought. After a few hours Lucian was done, much to Medea's amusement as she was watching him the whole time to make sure nothing bad happened. Lucian presented Medea with a batch of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies and a few muffins. Lucian looks at Medea with a grateful and soft smile as even if you are not a god, this is my offering to you as a thank you for everything you've done for me. Medea grew teary-eyed and put a hand on her mouth to stop herself from crying. She went and pulled Lucian into a tight hug and started kissing Lucian all over his face, much to his embarrassment. Mum. Lucian called out, pulling away with a beet-red face. Medea chuckled seeing his expression. Thank you, baby, Medea said with a large smile. Lucian just turned his face away to hide his blush as he mumbled, well, I got an offering to make. And grabbed a box with a lot of baked goods inside of them. He walked with the box outside and put it in front of him. He then made the ground swallow it up completely. He then sat on the ground, closed his eyes and put his hands together. Hey, Dad, first off I want to thank you and Auntie, Stepmom, for the weapon you made for me. It's so sick, so thanks. And thanks for helping Mom build me the underground smith. It looks awesome. As a thank you I'm making you this offering. I honestly didn't know what to make you, so I made you mostly chocolatey things. As for stepmom, auntie, I hope I'm not being rude for assuming she likes things made out of fruits since she's the spring goddess, so I made her a fruit cake. Well, that's enough of me talking, just make sure to enjoy. After all, they are to die for. He, get it? Lucien let out a sigh of relief when he was done. Due to being an atheist in his past life, it's a weird experience suddenly praying to a god, especially when one of those gods is his father. After praying to his father, Lucien closed his eyes and checked underneath to earth. To Lucien's relief, there was nothing there, which means his father must have gotten his offering. After checking, he went back inside and found his mother happily eating the cookies he made. These are fantastic, Lucien, good job. Lucien smirked and gained a smug expression. Well, I learned from the best after all. Medea just shook her head with a proud smirk and continued to eat cookies happily. Chapter 10. Third person's POF. As they say, time doesn't wait for no one. Lucien is already 6 years old. He was seen down in his smith hammering away on a small dagger that was glowing with a golden light. Lucien was currently using his demigod abilities of sensing precious metals to sense exactly where he needs to strike his hammer. When he was done, he grabbed tweezers and picked up the hot dagger and plunged it into water next to him, which caused it to release large amounts of steam. When he was done, he grabbed the now cold blade and hammered it into the handle of a small dagger, completing it. When he finished, he let out a sigh of relief and wiped his forehead that was dripping with sweat. He then grabbed the finished dagger, put it in its sheath and put it next to its completed partner, making a beautiful pair of twin daggers. Image of the daggers. When he paired them up, he looked up to his mom, who was watching and supervising everything, and asked, "Can I get your opinion on them and test it out?" Medea nodded her head and went and grabbed the daggers, pulling them from their sheath. She then started swinging them around. She started stabbing and slashing the air for a few seconds and nodded her head. Lucien looked at her expectantly and asked, "So? What do you think?" Medea looked at him, raised an eyebrow, looked down on the daggers, and looked back at him and asked, "Do you really want to know what I'm thinking right now?" Lucien nodded his head, expecting harsh criticism. Medea just smirked as she said, "You got me thinking whether I fucked the god of the dead or the god of blacksmithing." "Mother!" Lucien shouted as his ears turned red from embarrassment. "Why would you say something like that?" Medea just chuckled and shrugged her shoulders. "Because they're really well made. Good job. Although it took you almost 2 years, you finally made something praiseworthy." Lucien then grew embarrassed and rubbed the back of his head. "Oh shucks, you're only saying that 'cause you're my mother." Medea rolled her eyes at his silliness and put the dagger inside their sheath and asked, "So what are you going to enchant them with? This is your biggest project yet, isn't it? Before you only enchanted small regular ordinary items. This time it's celestial bronze." Lucien put a hand on his chin as he started to ponder on the question. "I'll enchanted the sheath first and foremost. They will be enchanted with a recall enchant, so if a dagger goes missing it will just reappear inside the sheath. Now on the daggers themselves, the most I could do is 3 enchantments without making them clash with each other and damaging the integrity of the daggers. In order for me to be able to add more, I would need more control of my magic and have more experience with high-speed divine words. So I'll go with the following 3 enchantments. Paralysis temporarily immobilizes enemies upon successful strikes, leaving them vulnerable for a short duration. Silent movement reduces the noise generated by your movements, enabling you to perform stealth attacks more effectively. Fortify one-handed/dual wielding increases the damage dealt when wielding the daggers, amplifying your offensive capabilities. As Medea listened, she nodded her head. "Those are good enchantments for a pair of daggers. Good thinking." Lucien nodded and started to work with a serious expression on his face, forgetting the world around him. Medea sighed, seeing this. Looks like he'll be gone into his own world for a little while. I guess I should start preparing him something to eat. After a few hours, Medea went down to see Lucien's process and saw him leaning against the table while breathing heavily, which caused Medea to sigh. She went towards him and patted him in the back. "That's enough for today, honey. Go on, take a shower. The food is about to be done." Lucien nodded and sluggishly started exiting his workshop, looking like he was going to drop from exhaustion any minute. Medea shook her head and looked towards the pair of twin daggers. She started to examine them, and after a while she let out a proud smile. "Although it's not perfect, it's still pretty good." Medea nodded appreciatively. When she was done, she went upstairs and started serving the food, but after a while, by the time Lucien was usually done taking a shower, he didn't come. Medea grew worried and went towards the shower and heard the shower running. She knocked on the door as she asked, "Honey, are you okay in there?" After not hearing him answer after a few seconds, Medea quickly opened the door and entered, and as she did she stopped what she was doing and looked at the scene in front of her with a weary smile, with her eyes and corner of her mouth twitching. Lucian was seen butt-ass naked leaning against the wall with his face pressed against, as hot water from the shower was hitting him. Medea didn't know if it was drool or just the water that was by the corners of his mouth. Medea's lip couldn't help but twitch at such a scene. She then smirked and went to grab something to record it with. When she was done preserving the memory, she went towards the shower and turned the handle towards the cold water. "Ah!" Lucian screamed, waking up and scrambling around feeling the sudden coldness. After a few seconds Medea turned it off and looked at Lucian with her arms crossed. Lucian stood there still naked, shivering from the cold. What's the matter with you? He stuttered as his lips quiver from the coldness. "What's the matter is that you're supposed to be downstairs already eating before going to bed, not wasting water." Lucian grew embarrassed and started covering his privates. "I swear it's just small because I'm cold, it's usually bigger." Medea just smacked him upside the head. "Just get ready to eat and go to bed," she said as she turned around and left. And Lucian did just that. He got dried, he changed, went downstairs, ate with his mother, and went off to bed. On to his next